I wanted to get into a sermon today about hot coals, and I was reading a story this week. It's actually been a few weeks. I read it again this week, but a few weeks ago, I saw this story about a town in Pennsylvania called Centralia, which I'm assuming is in the central of the state to be called that, but I don't know for sure that it is. But it was a mining town, a coal mining town, and for years and years and years, lots of mines went under the town there and around the town as they found a lot of coal. And somewhere around 1962, they don't know exactly for sure when it happened, there was a thought that maybe as the town was with our landfill trying to get rid of some trash, they burned too close to one of these mines or burned on top of one of the mines and it got through somehow. But somehow or another, the coal underneath the town caught fire. And at first, the town thought that was kind of funny. You know, we're going to lose a couple mines that way and no big deal. But it just kept growing. And it's all under the town. And then sulfur gas started escaping into people's houses. And carbon monoxide started escaping. A giant sinkhole opened up in the town, nearly swallowed up a 12-year-old boy. And not that many years ago, the governor of Pennsylvania finally said enough. And they paid everybody who lived in Centralia to go live somewhere else. You know, we're going to buy your property. And there were lawsuits. Some people had lived in Centralia their whole life, and they didn't want to move. At the end of the deal, you can look all this up. It's at the end of the day, there's 5 homes, 5 people who still live in Centralia. It used to be a town of 3 or 4 or 5,000. Now it's just 5 people living there. And the state has agreed to let them live there as long as they're alive. And then when they die, the state gets it's going to get their land. It cannot be passed on. It can't be sent. And they don't, and it's got to be a little bit of a nerve-wracking thing, knowing that a sinkhole could open up under your house at any time, knowing that carbon monoxide or sulfur gas could sneak into your house at all time. But that's the risk of living over burning coals. You know, that fire is always under there. And most estimates are it will continue to burn for another 250 years. They've even taken away the zip code. There's no zip code for this little section in the middle of Pennsylvania. It's just abandoned ground. It can't be used. There's all this poison under the ground, and it's all burning, and everybody knows it's there, and you just got to live with it. And I thought about that because I have a small group conversation we got in this week. We were talking in our small group about some different things, and in the middle of the conversation, we looked at a verse that is kind of a favorite verse of mine, and it reminded me of a youth minister. When I was a kid, a youth minister, just getting started in ministry, there was another youth minister that I had read some of his books and went to hear him talk and different things, and a guy named Jay Carty, and he mentioned in the middle of his sermon that the word for bitterness and wrath, that's the same word that the Hebrews used for hot coals. And the notion is that when you've got bitterness, when you've got wrath or rage, when you've got that kind of stuff in your heart, that it just takes a little bit of wind, and then it's a fire again. And I thought about that town in Centralia, you know, that you've got this smoldering fire underneath, and it just takes anything at all to make it explode. Doesn't take anything at all, and there's always this damage going on, but you don't know it. It's kind of simmering there under the surface. And so we got in this conversation in our small group. And one person said that they're from the kind of family that if somebody's mad, we talk about it right then. If you're mad, everybody's going to know about it, and we have to deal with it. No one's getting out of the house until we deal with it. Just out of curiosity, how many of you would be people like that? About 2. That's what I guess. The other side of the thing said, you know, in our family, we don't do that at all. We just bury it as deep as we can, and nobody talks about it ever again. How many of you go to families like that? That's what I was thinking. There you go. And but see, again, that hot coals deal, right? It just and what we decided in our small group, if you really can, just let it go. You know, somebody hurts you, or somebody says something, or somebody, teases you, or whatever, or they let you down, and it hurt, and it really kind of is a thing, and you're mad, but you say, hey, you know what, I'm just going to let this go. If you really could, just let it go, like it would never occur to you again, like it's gone. Well, that's the best. If you could do that, that's what you should do. That's absolutely the thing that you should do. I just find that most people can't do that. Most people, they can bury it, but it's still burning in there. and it's still looking for some air to be a bigger fire than it is. And that, on the other hand, if you want to be a Christian, that can cause you some trouble. And so I wanted to take just a week or two and talk about that. And it was kind of an impulsive thing. I'd planned to go into Thanksgiving mode already, and there's only a few days till Christmas. Yeah, but then we got in this conversation, and it kind of caught me, and so I thought, well, let's talk about that for a second, because it was interesting, and it kind of got my creative juices flowing. There's a verse in Ephesians 4. It says, "Get rid of all bitterness and rage and anger and brawling and slander, along with every form of malice." Just get rid of all that. And the get rid there is an imperative. It's a command. Paul's telling you go do it. And when you think about that, your first impulse might be, especially if you are kind of an angry person, or if you've got some anger kind of going on in the back of your head, is, well, how do you do that? That's a great idea. I'll just get rid of it. So how do you make that work? Or maybe if somebody has ticked you off and you feel like they've kind of earned a little bit of your anger because they've been obnoxious, you might not even want to get rid of the anger. And so like when it says command, how big a command is it? And I think you need to understand the context of the chapters here. Ephesians chapters 4 and 5 and 6. Paul is talking about the spiritual warfare that we're in. And that we're heading a certain direction in Christ, and the rest of the world is going a different direction. And if you want to go with Christ, this is the way. And if you don't want to do it, then you don't want to. Then it doesn't matter. But if you're wanting to go, and it put me in the mind of a coach, right? And he's begging his team to run a little harder. Give me one more lap, or to lift a little more, or to run through this drill one more time. And the kids are pouting about it, and they're resisting. And the coach knows the only way we're going to get to here is if you do this. You've got to sacrifice here to get to here. And the kids say, well, we're not even sure we want to get to there. We'd rather watch television. And the thing is, if that's where you're at, well then, yeah, you might not want to. Maybe you'd rather do what you do. But the only way to get to here is it's in that kind of a sense that Paul is talking about all these things. And that command, it really is a command. I don't want to minimize that. But it's a command in the context of all other stuff. If you want to be where Christ wants you to be, well, this is the path. And you've got to get rid of that kind of stuff. And the words there listed, all those words, they could just be synonyms of each other. It's possible that Paul doesn't really mean anything different by the different words, that it's just different ways of saying the same thing. And he says it over and over again kind of to emphasize it, And either way, the whole verse then, just get rid of your anger. But the different words that he uses, they all have some illustration value. They all have some it's interesting. Like the bitterness. Bitterness is the opposite of being sweet. Like if something's bitter on your taste, it's different and sweet. But it's also the opposite of being kind. When I'm bitter, I've got like a chip on my shoulder. I'm ticked off all the time. I'm a little bit on edge. When I'm enraged, and again, that bitterness and rage, they have that sense of that hot coals again. I'm just always boiling just a little bit. I'm just always ticked off. I looked this up. I want to make sure my stuff was right. August 8th of this year, at an intermediate school in Maui, Hawaii, at 6:37 in the morning, there was some fire reported. Nobody knows for sure how it started. The thinking is maybe a down power line. Sparks from a down power line lit some dry grasses up there, and it got it going. 6:37 on August 8th. By 10 o'clock that morning, the fire department said, we have it contained. And then at 3 o'clock that afternoon, they started seeing smoke, and it killed hundreds of people there on Maui. Well, what happened? The fire department came in, and they swept over everything. They thought they had it contained. Well, they did, but there were hot coals burning somewhere. There was something simmering somewhere. It just needed a little more wind and a little more fuel, and it would take right off again. And then we saw on our TVs all the damage that something like that can do. And that's that word rage. And anger, everybody knows what anger means. It's when you feel like you're not getting your way. You want something and you're not getting it. You feel like the world should be going a different direction than it's going, and it just ticks you off all the time. when you see that. Brawling and shouting sometimes can be synonyms of one another. Sometimes you'll see brawling written in there. Other translations will use shouting. Either way, it's a loud expression to your anger. It doesn't have to be necessarily brawling like fighting physical, but it could just be yelling and stuff like that. The word slander there is more the passive-aggressive kind of anger. It's the eye rolls and the little digs we take at one another. It's fault-finding. And then malice. Malice is, I looked that one up. It's a Greek word kakia, and it means it's a bad feeling. It's a bad feeling about somebody. And I was thinking about that, and I think I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. We judge people a lot, not so much on what they do, but what kind of feeling we have about them. Like you're driving to Bloomington, and it's been a long week, and you're tired, and it's one of those drives to Bloomington where you remember seeing Oolitic, but then after that you kind of fogged out there for a minute, and you're just kind of cruising along to Bloomington, and all of a sudden somebody passes you real fast. You don't even see them coming, and they're so close it feels like your mirrors are almost going to touch, and they kind of get close to you and roar the engine as they go by. And man, it just ticks you off, and they kind of cut into you there a little bit, and you're so mad and you're so frustrated, and then they slow down. Maybe they see you pounding on the steering wheel, and they slow down, and they kind of ease up beside you there, and you look over, and it's a buddy of yours. He's pointing at you, ha, ha, ha. And he goes, and all of a sudden, you tell your wife, oh, man, Chuck, what a dude, Chuck. What a scamp, you say, as Chuck, bunch of crazy kid. And again, it's the same, everything was the same, right? Everything was the same, but suddenly you know this guy, and so, oh, well, you know how he is. No big deal, right? And that'd be a good feeling. But I think sometimes we do the opposite. Like malice is that bad feeling. As soon as I see him, I already kind of have an idea in my head. Now, any of the isms, the sexism, racism, any phobias like that, homophobia or whatever, any of that, if I see a certain kind of person, then I don't like them. Just seeing them, I don't like them. That would be part of malice. But it can be more subtle than that. It can be more, you just get used to people being bad. And you've let me down so many times that I just don't believe anything good's going to come from you anymore. And you're just real skeptical that they're ever going to change. Your feelings have been hurt too many times. Now, when you get like that, and when it's like that, you'll start using words like always and never in your language. You always act like that. You never listen to me. And your conversations, because you don't expect anything to ever change. That's just like you, and that's how you are, and that's malice. When you have malice, the situation, when you're in a fight, the situation escalates very quickly. It seems like we're just talking about nothing, and then all of a sudden we're talking about this huge thing. And where'd this all come from? Well, it's malice. I read, actually, there's a whole genre of, it's because of a movie called Anchorman. There's a whole genre of memes. In Anchorman, Will Ferrell says that in the middle of the movie. He goes, well, that really escalated quickly. And it's a bunch of newscasters getting into a gang fight. It's a weird movie. But anyway, he said that really escalated quickly in the deal. There's a whole bunch of memes for that if you're interested in that sort of thing. And I looked up one of those. I don't know if you can see it way back in the back. They say that's a top question. What penalties would you like to see for repeat graffiti offenders? And Monica says they should have to clean their own mess. Then the lady below there, Barbara, says, I'd like to see their hands cut off. See, Barbara's had a bad experience or two. Barbara's had some bad moments, and it's escalated quickly with her, right? I mean, she's no longer going to be okay with just making them clean their mess. They've been hurt too many times, and that's malice, and we're called to get rid of all that, and it's real hard to get rid of it once it sets up big in your heart. Now, in the same scripture there, the same section, Paul gives us an antidote, or a couple of antidotes. He says, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. And it kind of resets for us our framework, right? The reason why we're forgiving is not because we're so magnanimous, and it's not because the other person does or does not deserve it. It's because Jesus did this for us. So because Jesus did this for us, I'm going to do this for others. And if you really understand what Jesus did for us, it becomes easier to do it for others. When Jesus is on the cross, he says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. If they understood everything, God, they wouldn't act like they do. And Jesus can pray that on the cross, and we're told to be like Jesus. And Paul, in this same section, goes on with that thought. He says, follow God's example. Some translations will say, imitate God, therefore, or be like God, therefore. Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and a sacrifice to God. Follow God's example, therefore. Jesus was gracious, and we should be gracious too, and get rid of all of the bitterness and rage and anger and brawling and slander and even the malice, that bad feeling. We need to get rid of all that. Just get rid of all of it if we want to go where he wants us to go. Now, when I'm writing this sermon and I'm going through this thing, I do sermons on this topic. I would guess I do sermons on this topic 2 or 3 times a year, every year that I've been here. I really do think, in terms of things that can derail your Christian faith, this might be number 1. It's certainly in the top 5 of things that can knock a person down. When you struggle in this area, it's very hard to draw close to Christ. It's very hard to draw close to Jesus. And so I think the devil fights real hard to keep his hooks in you when he gets his hooks in you on this area, because it's real effective for him. And I don't think he'll let go of that advantage that he has very easily. And so what I have found is when I speak on this topic or on this issue, that there are people who will maybe come to me afterward or tell me later on during the week or maybe even a few weeks later, well, I heard what you said, but what about this situation? Or what about this other thing? And so what it has made me do through the years when I preach on this topic is I try to think ahead of time. Well, what would be some of the objections a person might have? You know, I'm telling them to get rid of all their anger, get rid of all your bitterness, get rid of all your malice. What would be somebody's objection on that? Well, somebody might say, well, maybe there's a righteous anger. You know, didn't Jesus have a righteous anger? You know, Jesus, didn't he see injustice in the world sometimes and get real mad about it? And I do think there's a place for that. I don't know that I'd call it righteous anger as much as a righteous passion. I do think sometimes you'll look at the world and see something broken, and it should move you to action. But that doesn't feel like any of the stuff we've been talking about. It won't feel like anger in the same way that everything else we've been talking about does. Most of the injustice that I get most mad about is injustice to what I want. I wanted to do this, and you didn't let me, therefore that's a problem. I'm not really mad about little children going to bed hungry as much as I'm mad about me not getting the parking spot I want to get. And so when we talk about a righteous anger, sure, I think when you look at the world and its brokenness and you're passionately moved to want to do something, that we should applaud that and encourage it. But the problem is we're not really capable of it when it concerns us really that much. When the injustice is to us, we just have a hard time making the right determinations about it. It gets very easy to assume that the person who hurt us is more of a villain than maybe they are, and that we maybe are a lot more righteous than we would like to pretend to be. And the problem with being angry, of course, is it feels so good. It's kind of an underrated part about anger, but it feels good to be angry. Julie and I were driving somewhere the other night, and she picked at me about my driving. It happens sometimes. It's going too fast or too impatient, or you missed that turn, or what are you thinking, or what's going, they just picked at my driving. And I should be better than that, but it always ticks me off when that happens. And when I was younger, we would stop right there and have a conversation, and we would talk about it in the car, and it always went poorly. And somewhere in the last I don't know dozen years or so, I've hit on a different strategy. I just get real quiet in the car. I just don't really respond at all. I just get real quiet and kind of pout there as we're driving, and just quiet enough that I know it'll tick her off, but not so quiet that she could say, "What are you doing?" And because then I could always say, "Well, nothing. What are you doing?" And we'd have that deal, and so just and it feels good to kind of hold that over her just a little bit, let her know that I'm hurt, and how could she do something like that to somebody like me who's trying so hard to bless the family, and it feels morally righteous as I'm holding on to that, and I can't be the only one that does things like that. Maybe I'm one of the few who does things exactly like that, but I can't be the only one who does it. Another objection might be, well, wait a minute, shouldn't I be angry when people sin? When people sin, shouldn't that make me mad? Well, kind of, but Jesus died for that. Jesus cared so much about people's sin that he gave his own life for it. He shed his own blood for their sin. And I don't think your anger is going to tip the scale then. You know, what Jesus did was a lot, but if I can get mad on top of that, then maybe we can get something done. I don't think it's going to require you, again, like I think we'd like to think that it does. Paul, talking about this, he says, love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. You think about the argument that you have with somebody. You always do this. You never do that. And you've given up all hope in them ever figuring anything out. Love doesn't do that. Love gives a person another chance. Love hopes for something bigger, for something better. And I can imagine some objections to that. Well, wait a minute. Some people aren't trustworthy. Some people have proven time and time and time again that they're not trustworthy. What about those kinds of people? What about those kinds? So I could imagine when I was writing the sermon, because when you're writing a sermon like this, you imagine what the person who's disagreeing with you might say. And I can imagine I'm writing the sermon, and they're saying, well, wait a minute. So I guess I just got to turn my brain off to be a Christian. Somebody's proven to be untrustworthy, but I just got to pretend that they're not that way and just turn my brain off, and then I can be a Christian. And I don't think that's what Jesus is calling us to here. I don't think that's what Paul is calling us to here either, for a lot of reasons, but there's a couple just to hit on. One of the reasons is that there's a lot of things in the world that aren't trustworthy, but that we hold on to. Money's not trustworthy. It's not. The Bible talks about that quite frequently. And even in your own experience outside the Bible, you see what inflation does and how one bad investment or one bad choice, or you buy something and hope it'll make you happy and it doesn't make you happy at all. I mean, money's really unreliable, but I don't get rid of all of it. And I know that myself, I know my gut can't always be trusted. There have been different times in my life where my gut told me to go this direction and it dug me a huge hole. It took days and days and days to get out of. The little argument that Julia and I had in the car about my driving is a small example of that. My gut's telling me to do one thing, and my gut's wrong, right? But I'll still trust my gut next time. I have a huge amount of trust in myself and my instincts and what I think is right and wrong, even though I've proven time and time again that I'm not that trustworthy. But I'll keep trusting me. The only thing the Bible says is completely trustworthy is God in heaven. It says we can trust in the Lord with all our heart. We can trust in God with all our heart. And God says to be gracious, even to people who may let you down. I was watching a Pacer game this last week. I know, well, just to make me feel bad, how many of you care about the Pacers at all? That's what I thought. Okay, so I know that. I know that. There's about 4 of us that care, and I know that going into this thing. So it's a It's a really niche illustration, so just bear with me here as I work myself through it. But I'm watching the Pacers this week, and I've cared about the Pacers since the Steve Stepanovich years, and have rooted for them and hoped for good things out of the Pacers for a long time. And they're playing the Milwaukee Bucks, and they're just getting clobbered. Giannis is the best player on the Bucks. He's one of the best players in the NBA, and he's just beating them like a drum. I think at the middle of the third quarter, he had like 50 points. He had missed one or two shots all night long, maybe one free throw. He's just crushing the Pacers. And the Bucks got down early to the Pacers and then came back, and now they're ahead 10, and there's like 4 minutes left, and I turned the game off. This is stupid. This is stupid. I'm not going to watch them lose. And again, for you four who care about the Pacers, they won. They won. They came back and won. They came back and won that game. And I had to go back and watch it on YouTube like an animal, trying to see what had went out. I had to go back and watch replays to see how they had won, because I couldn't believe after all that stuff. And it's the Yogi Berra quote, right? It ain't over till it's over, right? And as a sports fan, there has to have been different times, if you care about sports at all, where you were sure your team had lost. It was over. I mean, it's done. The Colts down to the Patriots, 28-3 or something one year, and then Peyton comes back. And if you had walked out of the stadium in that moment, you just would have kicked yourself the rest of your life. I can't believe I gave up, because it ain't over till it's over. And even for that person who you think is completely untrustworthy, how big is the grace of God? Can God not reach them too? Now, I should pause in all of this thing and mention, you don't have to do this. It is a command in Scripture, but it's a command in Scripture with a certain eye to a certain goal. And then that may not be your goal. And you don't have to do it. You don't. There is a time when somebody has, and if it's abuse, if we're talking about somebody who's abusing you, you're allowed to protect yourself. You certainly should call the police. If it's somebody who's abusive, maybe calling the police would be the very most Christian thing you could do so they don't hurt somebody else. I would think so. I would think you should call the police in a situation like that. And even if it's not like a criminal abuse, maybe it's not a criminal abuse, but it's really, really mean behavior, I think you should confront them. And if that first confrontation doesn't go well, take it up a notch, confront them harder with more people. I mean, get into this thing. I think I agree with all that. And I even agree that sometimes it is just so unworkable. There is so much damage. There is so much junk that you just got to move on. And I know that. I get it. It happens. I don't like divorces. I don't like those kinds of breakdowns, but I get it. It's one of those things. I understand, and I understand that. So don't you're not the worst person in the world if you feel different than I do on that, and that's fine. But I want to tell you that God is trustworthy, and it ain't over till it's over. And when you learn how to show grace, even when your gut is screaming at you to go a different direction, there's something pretty powerful about that. So what I wanted to do here at the end of the sermon was to really kind of laser focus in on this one thing. Now, I recognize that for a lot of you, maybe even most of you, this is not a struggle at all. It's just not a problem, and that's awesome if that's you. When Julia and I first got into ministry, we stayed with an old man and an old woman in their house, and they had been married for a long time, and they told us once in a dinner conversation they'd been married for all these years, and they had never had an argument. And Joey and I looked at each other like, oh, dear Lord, I mean, we've already had one getting to dinner here this evening. How are we going to, what's that mean for us, And But if that's you, and when you say, I let it go, you let it go. If that's you, awesome. I want you to pray for the rest of the people here because I want the end of it to be for the people who do struggle with this a little bit. I think it holds you back from being who you're supposed to be in Christ. And the secret is to hand it to Him. That's the secret. God, I can't keep being mad at Chuck like this. I just can't do it. God, you got to take that. And you hand it to Him. And for most people, you'll have to hand it to Him several times. Because you'll be by yourself in the car or the shower or someplace and you'll grab it back and start arguing it again. So you'll have to, and when that happens, God, I just can't do this. This is yours, not mine. And you hand it to Him. I'm not a big guy for visualization, where you close your eyes and try to imagine something. But on this particular thing, that picture of I'm going to pour out this pan of hot coals and I'm not going to carry it around anymore, God. You've got to take that. It's His to avenge. He can handle it. Righteous anger is His thing, and He can do it and do it righteously and morally, and we can't. And God, I need you to handle this. And you say the words. God, I forgive them for what they did. And forgiven doesn't mean you're going to trust them again. And forgive them doesn't mean you're going to let them hurt you again. But I'm just not going to carry this anymore. My anger, God, is not going to tip the scales of justice to get them in trouble, but it certainly is tipping the scales to making me a worse person. So I'm going to give it to you. And you pray it that way, and you ask God to move through it. And He'll start healing you. It's like a wound. Sometimes they have to go in and they clean that whole wound out, and they really wash it with the very best cleaners and chemicals and soaps, and they get all the infection out of there and all the dirt out of there, and now it's just got to heal. But it can't heal until you get rid of all that stuff. So at the end of the service here, I want to challenge you. And in particular, I want you to be sensitive to phrases like this. Like, I just don't care for those people. Or for that guy. For that lady. They're up to no good all the time. Every time I see them, I get mad all over again. Those people. Be sensitive to phrases like that. Be sensitive to phrases like where you've dismissed people. Be sensitive when I talk about it if a certain face pops into your head, when I'm talking about it. And for me, some of my wounds on this thing, I've had to hand it to God 100 times through the years. I've had to hand it to God over and over again because the wound was deep enough or hard enough or powerful enough. Sometimes the wound is in your own house. It's a husband and a wife who have just gotten to where you just don't expect anything out of the other person anymore. And you've gotten so hard about this. You're not like you used to be. And so you start praying, God, this has to be your thing. Make my heart soft like yours, God. Make me like you. And you choose to hand this away. So I'm going to pray with you about it. And then there will be people in the front who are willing to pray with you longer if you want to. And then I'm available after the service too to talk if you need to talk about anything. We'll have some people in the back of the room, and they'll have name tags on by the back door there. And if you need to go pray with them and go to a separate room and have some privacy there, they'll do that with you and pray with you there too. Just take advantage of this time if you are carrying that sort of thing to hand it to God.